Section 14 of Lives of the Queens of England, Volume 5, by Agnes and Elisabeth Strickland. This recording is in the public domain. Mary, Chapter 2, Part 3. The low state of Mary's finances this year obliged her to make the following representation to Cromwell by letter. It hath pleased the King's Majesty, my most gracious father, of his great goodness, to send me every quarter of this year £40, as you best know who are the means of it, as, I thank you, you be for all my other suits. And seeing this quarter of Christmas must needs be more changeable than the rest, specially considering the house I am in, I would desire you, if your wisdom thought it most convenient, to be a suitor to the King's said Highness, somewhat to increase the sum. She adds, she is ashamed to be a beggar, but the occasion is such she cannot choose. The King, in consequence of this application, sent her £100 by Mr. Heneage that month. In a preceding letter she wrote to Cromwell, she said, My lord, your servant hath brought me the well-favoured horse that you have given me, with a very goodly saddle, for the which I do thank you with all my heart, for he seemeth to be indeed as good as I heard reported of him, which was, that he had all qualities belonging to a good horse. Wherefore I trust, in time to come, the riding on him shall do me very much good concerning my health. She usually wrote in very affectionate terms to Cromwell, and took a rating from him now and then, without much indignation. She had been used, from her infancy, when he was Wolsey's factotum and universal man of business, to receive all her supplies from his hands, and to regard him as a person in practical authority. Towards the close of the year 1539, the Privy Councillor, Wriothesley, came to Hertford Castle, for the purpose of informing Mary that it was her father's pleasure she should instantly receive as a suitor Duke Philip of Bavaria, who was at that time in England, announcing the approach of his kinswoman Anne of Cleves, the betrothed wife of Henry VIII. Wriothesley mentions the mode of his admission to the Princess Mary in the following letter, as if she were sedulously guarded, if not under restraint. T. Wriothesley to Cromwell. Pleaseth your lord to understand that arriving here at Hertford Castle this afternoon, about 2 of the clock, upon knowledge given of my coming and desire to speak with my Lady Mary's grace, I had immediate access to the same, to whom, after the delivery of the King's Majesty's token, with his grace's most hearty commendation, I opened the cause and purpose of my coming, in as good a sort as my poor wit had conceived the same. Whereunto she made me answer, that albeit the matter were towards her of great importance, and besides, of such sort and nature as, the King's Majesty not offended, she would wish and desire never to enter that kind of religion, but to continue still a maid during her life, yet remembering how, by the laws of God and nature, she was bound to be in this, and all other things, obedient to the King's Highness, and how, by her own bond and obligation, she had heretofore, of her free will, according to her said bond and duty, obliged herself to the same, though she might by frailty be induced in this so weighty a thing to cast many doubts, and to take great stay with herself, yet wholly and entirely, without qualification, she committed herself to his Majesty, as her most benign and merciful Father and most sovereign Lord, trusting and most assuredly knowing that his goodness and wisdom would so provide in all things for her, as should much exceed her simple capacity, and redound to his grace's honour and her own quiet. Which thing she will this night write with her grace's own hand, to be sent by me to-morrow on my return. I assure your lordship here can be no more desired, than with all humility and obedience is offered, and because I must tarry all night for these letters, I thought meet to signify how far I had proceeded, to the intent the King's Majesty, knowing the same, may further in all things determine, as to his grace's high wisdom shall be thought meet and expedient. The expression that Mary used to Wriothesley, that, the king's majesty not offended, she would wish and desire never to enter that kind of religion, but to continue still a maid, has occasioned some difference of opinion between two historians, one taking it, that she declined religious vows; another, that she termed matrimony a species of religion. But, if this letter really refers to the courtship of Duke Philip of Bavaria, it is a plain representation that she would prefer remaining single, to marrying and owning, as her lord, one who was a supporter of the Protestant religion, and her words can bear no other meaning. Mary might venture this remonstrance to her father, who had committed such enormities in persecuting the tenets of the very prince to whom he was now disposing of her hand. A few days after the date of Wriothesley's letter, the French ambassador, Marillac, in a letter dated December 27, 1539, says, "I have heard from the same source, touching the marriage of the eldest daughter of the king, the lady Mary, with this duke of the house of Bavaria. 3 or 4 days ago, in the most secret manner which could be, he went to salute and visit her in a house of the abbot of Westminster, in the gardens of the abbey, 1 mile from this city, where the said lady had been brought privately, and after having kissed her, which is considered here as a declaration of marriage, or of near kindred, and, considering also that, since the death of the late marquess, no lord, however great he may be in this kingdom, has presumed to do so, this seems to imply much. The said duke had a long discourse with her, partly in German, with an interpreter, and partly in Latin, of which she is not ignorant, and, in conclusion, he declared to the king his resolution to take her to wife, provided that his person be agreeable to the said lady." The day after Anne of Cleves made her public entry, King Henry invested Mary's German wooer with the Order of the Garter, an honour which he well deserved, on account of his gallant defence of Vienna against the Turks, in 1529, when he won the cognomen of Bellicosus, or the Warlike. He was the first Protestant prince invested with the Order of the Garter, but neither his renown in arms, nor his eloquent wooing in High Dutch and Latin, could atone, in the eyes of Mary, for his Lutheranism, or his league against the emperor her relative. Philip the Warlike had many opportunities of seeing Mary, during the festivities which celebrated the ill-omened marriage of Anne of Cleves and Henry VIII. He departed from the court of England, January 27th, with the intention of returning and claiming Mary as his bride, to whom he presented at his departure the love token of a diamond cross. The important preliminaries of dote or portion and jointure were at that time already settled. Poor indeed they were, for the brave Bavarian was but a younger brother, and, being an opponent of the Catholics, received Mary of course as a person of stigmatized birth. Henry VIII named as her portion less than £7,000, and Duke Philip could offer her a jointure of but £800 or £900 per annum. The insults and injuries that were inflicted on the unoffending Anne of Cleves by Henry VIII broke the troth between Mary of England and Philip the Warlike. By her father's orders, Mary returned the diamond cross to the Lord Chancellor, who duly transmitted it to Philip. And Mary perhaps whispered, like Portia, "A gentle riddance." Yet the brave German appears to have been sincerely attached to her, for he remained single, and renewed his suit 6 years afterwards, and, being repulsed, died a bachelor, as became a true knight and lover. Well had it been for Mary if her hand had been given to the brave and true-hearted German Philip, instead of his cruel Spanish namesake. The interrupted accounts of the princess commence again with the new year of 1540. Mary received many New Year's gifts, and was very liberal in her distribution of presents, especially to her sister Elisabeth, to whom she gave a yellow satin kirtle, made with 5 yards of satin at 7s. 6d. the yard. The Princess Mary, in her own hand, has marked against the item, "For a kirtle for my Lady Elizabeth's grace." 7 yards of yellow damask, at the same price, is presented by Mary to the nurse of her brother Edward, for a kirtle. Mrs. Cavendish, the woman of the Princess Elizabeth, and Raff, her chaplain, are given New Year's gifts of 10s. Each, and Mary twice supplied her sister's pocket with money to play withal, the sums being 10s. and 20s. The New Year's gifts she presented to her brother Edward was a crimson satin coat, embroidered with gold by the king's broiderers, and further ornamented with pansies, formed of pearls, the sleeves of tinsel, with 4 gold aglets, or hooks and eyes. An inconvenient garment, stiff and cumbersome, it must have been for an infant little more than 2 years old, but young children are habited in garments modelled into miniature resemblances of costumes worn by grown persons, a practice which certainly continued till late in the last century with far more ridiculous effect. The princess spent some weeks at her father's court, and many items of high play, and even wagers lost by her, mark the manner in which she passed her time. She lost a frontlet, in a wager with her cousin, Lady Margaret Douglas, for which she paid £4. These frontlets were the ornamented edges of coifs or caps, similar to, or modifications of, the costume familiar to the eye in the headdress of Anne Boleyn. Some were edged with gold lace, and this, by the price, appears to have been of that class, and others with pearls and diamonds. The Princess Mary not only pledged caps, but lost breakfasts at bowls, which were among the games played by ladies on the greensward. To counterbalance these items, she paid this quarter for the education of a poor child, and binding him apprentice. In the summer of 1540, Mary's privy purse expenses suddenly ceased, and she was laid on a bed of sickness, at her brother's residence at Tittenhanger. The last items recorded are her payments to the king's surgeon of 1 sovereign, for coming from London to bleed her, and 15s. to her old apothecary, John, for stuff, likewise alms to the poor of 40s, and a gift of pocket money to her sister Elisabeth. The diary of her expenses ceased a few weeks before the marriage of her father with Catherine Howard, and was not resumed for more than 2 years. The disturbed state of England at this period gives reason to suppose that Mary's household was broken up, and that she, though passive and unoffending, was placed where her person could be in more security than in her own dwellings. Among other indications of change in her establishment, her young favourite, the fair Geraldine, was taken from her service, and transferred to that of the newly married queen at Hampton Court. It was here that Surrey first admired her, as may be ascertained by his interesting biographical sonnet, which traces, with singular clearness, her origin and the events of her young life. From Tuscany came my lady's worthy race. Fair Florence was sometime her, or their, ancient seat. The western isle, whose pleasant shore doth face, wild Camber's cliffs did give her lively heat. Fostered she was with milk of Irish breast, her sire an earl, her dame of prince's blood. From tender years in Britain she did rest with king's child, where she tasted costly food. Hunsdon did first present her to mine eye. Bright is her hue and Geraldine her height. Hampton me taught to wish her first for mine. Windsor, alas, doth chase me from her sight. Her beauty of kind, her virtue from above, happy is he that can obtain her love. Dreadful events took place in England in the years 1540 and 1541, events which must have produced a fearful effect on the mind of the Princess Mary, and prepared the way for most of the vengeful persecutions which disgraced her reign. This woeful epoch saw the destruction of all her early friends. Her old schoolmaster, Dr. Featherstone, suffered the horrid death of treason, in company with Abel, her mother's chaplain, and another zealous Catholic. They were dragged to Smithfield, with fiendish impartiality, on the same hurdles that conveyed the pious Protestant martyr, Dr. Barnes, and 2 of his fellow sufferers, to the flaming pile. Scarcely could the princess have recovered the shock of this butchery, when the frightful execution of her beloved friend and venerable relative, the Countess of Salisbury, took place. She was hacked to pieces on a scaffold, in a manner that must have curdled Mary's blood with horror, and stiffened her heart to stone. The connection of these victims with Mary has never been clearly pointed out, nor the consequent effect of their horrid deaths on her mind properly defined, nor her feelings analyzed, which were naturally excited against those who were in power at the time of their destruction. Her murdered friends were persons of unblemished lives and unswerving integrity, against whom no crime was imputed, excepting their fidelity to the cause of her mother and their disapproval of Henry VIII's spiritual supremacy. When the explosion regarding the conduct of Catherine Howard took place, it will be found, by the state papers, that Mary was resident at Sion with her cousin Margaret Douglas, and the young Duchess of Richmond, widow of Henry VIII's natural son. The princess and her companions were removed from Sion to make way for the wretched queen and her guards. They were escorted to the nursery palace of Prince Edward by Sir John Dudley, and some of Catherine Howard's servants were appointed to attend on them. The derelictions of Henry VIII's young queen gave Mary's partisans hopes that she would remain second in the succession, for so she was usually regarded, notwithstanding the acts of parliament still in force against her title. This improved prospect brought on an earnest negotiation for her hand, which was demanded by Francis I. for his second son Charles, Duke of Orleans. This treaty was conducted at Chablis in Burgundy, and the most important dispatches regarding it are dated April 22, 1542. The privy councillor, Paget, a man of low origin, but deep in all the intrigues of Henry VIII's cabinet, was the ambassador from England. He was, it seems, a person who made his way by his facetious conversation, for his dispatches are a diplomatic comedy, and he gives the dialogue with the High Admiral of France, respecting the princess and the Duke of Orleans, in a droll, quaint style, calling the princess "our daughter," namely, daughter of England, while Bonnivet calls the Duke of Orleans "our son." On the matter of dot or dowry, these two worthies were by no means likely to come to terms, and when Paget unfolded to the admiral that Henry VIII only offered 200,000 crowns with Mary, while Francis I required a portion of 1,000,000, the French admiral, says Paget, heaved 20 sighs, and cast up his eyes as many times, besides crossing himself, for I marked him when he was not aware of it. Then, sending forth one great sigh, he spoke his mind pathetically on the smallness of the Lady Mary's dot. Paget declared, "It was a fair offer, since the Duke of Orleans was but a second son. Had King Louis XII any more than 300 crowns with the Princess Mary, her aunt, though a sovereign prince? And as for the King of Scots, he got only 100,000 with Margaret." Next day, the Duke of Longueville, governor to the French prince, took Paget by the hand, and led him to the apartments of his royal charge, where he was treated with an exceeding great feast and good cheer. About 2 o'clock, this was certainly after dinner, the admiral sent for Paget, and every man avoided out of the chamber. "Monsieur l'ambassadeur," quoth he, "let us devise some means of joining the Lady Mary and our prince together. We ask your daughter," quoth he. "For her you shall have our son, a genty prince," quoth he, "and set him out to sail. We ask you a dote with her, and after the sum you will give, she shall have an assignment, or jointure, in our country." "By my faith," continued he, "the dote you have offered is as nothing, and if the Duke of Orleans were independent as Louis XII and the King of Scots, he would rather take the Lady Mary in her kirtle than with the mean portion of 200,000 crowns." The treaty ended futilely, like all the preceding ones. It had the effect, however, of paving the way for a recognition, though an imperfect one, in Parliament of Mary's rights in the succession. It may be gathered from a letter, hitherto unedited, at the State Paper Office, written throughout in Mary's hand, that she was made the medium of pacification between her father and the Emperor Charles V, when she was residing with her brother Edward and her sister Elisabeth at Havering Bower. In all probability, the princesses occupied together the neighbouring palace of Pergo. It will be observed that she mentions her sister as present with her at the audience she gave the Spanish ambassadors. Letter of the Lady Mary. My lord, after my most hearty commendations to you, these shall be to advertise you that this day, before dinner, the emperor's ambassadors came to Havering, where Here a provoking hiatus occurs from injury to the paper, but the lost words have reference to the little prince her brother, and she goes on to say: "And after they had done their duty to him, they came to my sister and me, and showed me how they had taken their leave of the king's highness, my father, and by his license came for the same purpose, declaring unto me, what great amity they trusted should increase between the king and the emperor, and how glad he would be to do me good. Upon occasion whereof, as much as I could, I spoke unto them the whole effect of your last letter, whereunto they answered, that they were sorry to enter in such communications with me, seeing they came but to take leave of me, and that the one of them, now going to the emperor's court, might instead of thanks tell complaints, and that it grieved them the more considering my modesty in so long time I had showed. They took it to be great wisdom in me, that seeing the matter of so long success, and the jeopardy that slowness causeth in such business, I would help myself, for they said that the help of God was won as well with diligence as with prayer. Moreover, desiring me to give them leave to speak, they said, that if they had time to understand the least part of the good will that the emperor hath shown and beareth to the king's grace, my father, and to me also, because I am the daughter unto—" Here the words are gone, and whether the ambassadors mean Henry VIII or Catharine of Aragon is uncertain. "To whom he oweth the love and obedience of a son. They could somewhat blame me for the unkindness laid to their master's charge, but they attributed all the negligence and little care that I had been informed in that matter, and they took my diligence now for virtue, and because that in coming to particularize the fault and coldness that I put in them I might lay to persons to whom I owe reverence, and ministers to whom I owe goodwill, which they would not because the emperor's desire is that I should be always in the goodwill and obedience of the most noble king my father, as I am now. Leaving to dispute on their parts, they said, that the will which their master beareth me was, and is, and ever shall be, entire, as shall be seen by the effect that he shall ever offer, and shall always continue both in this and the friendship, which he hath ever borne to the king, as they said before, as well as in the matter before said, as in all things that a good and a just friendship and alliance ought. They said, that was the thing they most desired in this world, and would think it great felicity and good gain to be ministers and intercessors, that this good and pure friendship may always continue for the desire that they have to serve both parties, and the good will they bear me. This was our whole communication, as far as I remember, before dinner, and after dinner, when they came to take leave, I gave them as gentle words as my wit would serve me, according to your counsel, and they varied in nothing from the effect above said. And so I write this letter, for I could not be satisfied till I had fulfilled your desire in sending you word of all these things, as God knoweth, who keep you for evermore. From Portgrove, this Tuesday at 9 of the clock at night. Your assured loving friend during my life, Mary. The very guarded language Mary uses in this letter injures its perspicuity, but its object is evidently to impress cautiously on the minds of her father and his ministers the importance of her position as a bond of union between the English government and her kinsman, the Emperor Charles V. This curious epistle affords the first instance of a daughter of the royal family of England taking any part as a diplomatist. Mary came at Christmas 1542 direct from young Edward's residence to her father at Westminster, as may be gathered from the recommencement of her privy purse journal. To the care of Mistress Finch were given her funds, and likewise her jewels. The New Year's gifts sent to the princess for 1543 are noticed in the renewed accounts. Some of them possess biographical interest, others mark improvements in inventions, and in the state of female costume and occupations at that era. The Princess Elisabeth sent her sister a little chain, and a pair of hose made of silk and gold. The Lady Margaret Douglas, a gown of carnation satin of the Venice fashion. The Duchess of Suffolk, Catherine Willoughby, a pair of worked sleeves and pullers out for an Italian gown. Lady Calthrop, 2 pair of sleeves, whereof one pair was worked with silver, and the other with gold and parchment lace. This article occurs more than once, and was the first indication of Brussels lace. 3 Venetians sent the princess a fair steel glass. If this had been a mirror of polished steel, they would not have called it glass. But as Venice was the birthplace of looking glasses, the accountant has supposed the quicksilver was polished steel but under glass. Another article occurs of the same kind directly after. My young lady of Norfolk, 2 pair of worked sleeves, half a dozen handkerchiefs, and a steel glass. Lady Anne Grey presented 2 artificial flowers, and her aunt, Lady Kildare, mother of the fair Geraldine, a comb case set with pearls. The fair Geraldine herself, under the designation of Lady Brown, of London, sent a New Year's gift to her patroness. Its nature this year is not mentioned, but next year it was a fuming box of silver. Sir Anthony Brown, the ancient bridegroom of this young lady, drew the princess for his Valentine, 1543, and received from her a gift of a brooch, set with 4 rock rubies round an agate, enamelled black, with the story of Abraham. There is a previous instance of the princess being drawn as a Valentine by George Montjoy, one of the gentlemen of her household, who received in consequence a present of money. The high collars with little ruffs, often seen in the portraits of this time, are described as being set on capes, and are called partlets. Partlets were often presented as New Year's gifts. Likewise, work chemises, probably similar to the modern chemisette, are sent to the princess from many of her female friends. They are, however, registered by an old English word which looks homely enough everywhere, excepting in Shakespeare's enchanting spring lyric. But who objects to ladies' smocks all silvery white? Several domestic animals are mentioned. Boxley, a yeoman of the king's chamber, was given by the princess 15s. For bringing her a present of a little spaniel. Previously, Sir Brian Tuck had sent her a couple of little fair hounds. A woman of London had 5s. For bringing her a brid or a bird in a cage, and the woodman of Hampton Court took charge of a white lark the princess had left there, and he received 3d. For bringing it to her at Westminster in April 1543. Mary was present at her father's marriage with Catharine Parr. This fact and the circumstances connected therewith have already been narrated in the biography of that queen. She accompanied her father and his bride on a summer progress to Woodstock, Grafton, and Dunstable, but, being seized with a violent return of her chronic illness, she was carried in the queen's litter to her mother's former abiding place, the Honour of Ampthill. From thence, after several removes, she was finally carried to Ashridge, where her brother and sister were sojourning, and with them she spent the autumn. Many of her attendants were at this time suffering under the influence of a sickly season, and were as ill as their mistress, for her slender income was taxed for lodging, nursing, and medicine for them, at a distance from the bustle of the royal residences. Her faithful old servant, Randall Dodd, was very sick, and one of her women, called Bess Cressy, was long chargeable during illness. Jane the Fool was indisposed in health, and on recovery was taken with a fit of industry, since a solitary article appears in the accounts of the Princess Mary of 1d. expended for needles for Jane the Fool. A chair was worked for King Henry in the autumn by Mary and her maidens as a New Year's gift for the king. It was of such ample dimensions that the materials cost £20. When King Henry and his bride returned to Westminster, the Princess Mary joined them there at Christmas. She must have been greatly distressed for money, owing to her bounty to her sick servants, and the expenses of her own long affliction, for she sold a pair of gilt silver pots for £37, 19s. 4d, and a fur of budge for £19 15s. Soon after she received a very seasonable token of her stepmother's kindness, in the substantial form of a gift of £40. The income of Mary was so small and precarious that every one of her numerous benefactions must have been attended with some degree of self-sacrifice. Her early dignity as the sole offspring of the sovereign, and the great expenses lavished on her household and establishment in her infancy and girlhood, rendered the subsequent privations of a limited and precarious income more embarrassing. Those who sued for her bounty expected her to bestow as munificently as if she were the eldest princess of England. Those who supplied her income apportioned it according to the law which had ranked her as an illegitimate and cast off scion of the royal family. This harassing uncertainty of station, however, ceased in the close of 1543, and the ensuing year brought a favourable change to the prospects of the disinherited princess. Section 15